Hey, welcome to this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Matt Belanger from WGAL TV, filling in for Terry Madonna this week. Great program lined up for you. Clock is ticking for the Pennsylvania General Assembly. We have a Democrat and a Republican to talk about what's on the to-do list and maybe what's not on the to-do list that some say should be. Also, Secretary of the Commonwealth Carol Aichle is with us to talk about Pennsylvania's voter ID law. It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Once again, welcome to the program. I'm Matt Belanger from WGAL TV, filling in for Terry Madonna this week. You know, Republican leaders in the State House and Senate have decided there's not going to be a lame duck session this year, so state lawmakers have just a few session days before Election Day to get things done. And to help us run down the to-do list, we have a few members of the General Assembly joining us. The Democrat with us, Representative Eugene DePasquale, and the Republican Representative Stan Saylor, both from the fine county of York. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
Stan, we'll start with you because you are in the majority. You get to set the agenda. I don't want a wish list here. Tell me what needs to get done and what will get accomplished before Election Day.
That's good because the wish list would be very long. Well, we're going to look at the charter school legislation. Some of it we'll be looking at who gets to authorize charter schools, also the requirements that charter schools have to meet. We've had some discussions over that. We also want to talk about special education funding. We're going to talk about our debt, limiting the debt and borrowing ability of Pennsylvania future. We know what we've seen during the rundown years of tremendous borrowing and higher taxes. So we're trying to make sure that in the future we protect Pennsylvania's taxpayers that way. So we'll be talking about that in the fall. And we'll also probably delve into transportation issues as well. That's a major issue for Pennsylvania and our infrastructure. And so we'll be tackling those three issues, I think, in the limited time we're together.
Representative DePasquale, anything not on that list you think should be?
Well, first I want to say I do agree that the charter school legislation needs to happen there. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about this from both sides. You know, the people wanting to make sure that the funding system is fair across the board, and at the same time there are appropriate accountability measures. I'm hearing that from charter school advocates and from the traditional public school advocates. So I'm glad to hear that that's something that we're hoping to tackle. And I do think the House passed, I thought, a pretty good bill. Maybe it could be improved upon, but I think that was something that happened at the end. We simply ran out of time at the budget. Sure. That's something I do think needs to be tackled. And I know Stan and I are on the same page on this, but I'm not sure it can get done in the fall. Yeah. But I would like to see something get done on transportation.
Well, what's the holdup there? I mean, Representative Saylor, are we waiting for the governor's direction here? Why not move a bill so far?
Well, I think that's it. Yeah. We're looking to see what the governor's going to recommend to the General Assembly as a whole. And anytime let's be honest, it's election season. Yeah. And anytime you're talking about additional revenue, you're talking about taxes or fee increases, and it's tough to get
the driver's fees. We're talking about the fees for drivers,
a gas tax, whatever the fees may be that the governor recommends, or any members of the legislature. I mean, I know there's several bills in to provide additional funding for transportation and our infrastructure. Yeah. The debate will also be over how much money goes to different parts of the infrastructure. Remember, you've got mass transit, you've got highways, you've got bridges, you've got any number of railroads, airports, so on and so forth. So how that money is divvied up also becomes into discussions. Yeah. And it takes a lot of work between Democrats, Republicans, and the administration. Sure. Because it's not, transportation is not a Republican or Democratic issue one way or the other. It really is about all of us coming together and working out.
But is it right that election year worries are putting a delay on this very important issue? I mean, we all saw what happened in Minnesota with the bridge collapse there. I mean, the finger would point to Harrisburg if something, God forbid, like that would happen in Pennsylvania.
Three things. Number one is, I agree with Stan 100%. So I just want to say on how we outlined that, not only is it Republicans, Democrats, but you do have to have the administration on board and making sure each region has a seat at the negotiating table. Mm-hmm. Two, whether it is right or wrong, again, I put Stan and me not in that category, but certainly when the closer you get to an election, a lot of legislators get cold feet.
That's especially about raising fees people have to pay.
That's just a reality. Yeah. But number three, my biggest concern on this not being done in the fall, and I'm not trying to put words in Stan's mouth, but I think he'll agree with me, the longer we put this off, and I think it's been put off too long to begin with, the cost only gets more.
Okay, very good. What about the liquor privatization effort, selling off the state's wine and spirit stores? That was out there. Everyone thought this could be the year that this might happen, and it seemed to have fizzed out here. What's the latest with that, Representative Saylor?
Well, I think Representative Terzai and the governor and the Senate leaders are going to meet and see whether there is a new plan. And I say new plan, we have House Bill 11, which is the liquor plan to privatize, if there can come to an agreement.
Is the appetite there?
Definitely, the polls are very overwhelmingly in favor of privatizing our liquor stores in the state. The key is coming down to
among the public, but my question's about the General Assembly.
The General Assembly, I think, is there if we can work out a plan. Again, when you privatize something, you got to make sure it's done correctly, especially something that's been here for centuries. Yeah. So we got to make sure that when we privatize, that it's a fair system for everybody. And I think everybody's perception of, well, is it liquor in a grocery store, or is it liquor at a beer distributor, or what exactly when we talk about privatizing? And everybody has a different idea what it should be. Right. The idea is coming together and formulating a plan that the majority of the House and the Senate, as well as the governor, can agree to.
Quick thought on privatization. Are we talking about the money? Is that the crux of how much the state's going to get?
I think that's a piece of it. I think what's interesting about this is that, and I think Stan is right where the polls are. And then I'll have town hall meetings and people say, when is that bill going to pass? It's going to allow me to buy beer in the grocery store. I mean, so the point is that
they don't fully understand the scope.
Just privatizing the liquor stores would not change one iota of the beer distribution. I know Leader Terzai did have a piece of that in his legislation, but this is one of those ones that once you get into the details of it, it gets a lot more complicated. Where it would be sold, how the license would happen, what happens with the beer, because the beer distributors are private businesses. I mean, and so they've been operating a business based on that almost, in a sense, guarantee that they would have that ability to do that. If you were starting the system today, there's no way we would have the system we currently have. But now that we've had the system in place for many decades, changing it is very challenging.
We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about more that should be or is on the to-do list in Harrisburg with the last few remaining session days, and maybe we'll get a little conversation in about property tax reform. It's all coming back your way next.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program, talking with members of the General Assembly, a Democrat and a Republican, about what's going to get done during the last few session days here before the end of the two-year session. Democrat Representative Eugene DePasquale and Republican Representative Stan Saylor from New York here with us. Keeping the conversation going here, let's turn the focus to property tax reform. That's an issue that gets the public fired up. They want it. Talk about public opinion being overwhelming on an issue. But what's the problem here? The Property Tax Independence Act, it has what appears to be a solution for a different way to fund schools using sales tax and personal income tax. Why not see this bill move?
First of all, in an earlier version of that, Stan and I both voted to eliminate school property taxes. And I think that, you had about 10 Democrats. I was one of them, about 37 Republicans. But it's clear it's nowhere close to a majority. I think there's two reasons for that. I mean, again, both of us being on record being for getting rid of the school tax. I think how you distribute the school money has to be addressed at the exact same time to find a way to get the votes. And also, especially in the southeastern part of the state, I think that they believe that the current system, especially when you look at the city of Philadelphia and some of the suburban districts, they either A, think the current system works because property taxes isn't a bigger problem, and also in many of the rural districts as well, or two, even if they don't like the current property tax system, they believe that their public schools are adequately funded. Those two dynamics have made it very challenging for us to break the logjam in Harrisburg.
Representative Saylor, how much of this comes down to people being worried about if this new formula is going to bring in enough money, and a little bit of a learning curve there that the public realizing they'll be paying sales tax on things they haven't paid it on in the past?
Well, and then the concern, too, is that we have to have a constitutional amendment to our state constitution to allow shopping centers, huge businesses. Like if you're in York, the Harley-Davidson, the Galleria Mall, the West Manchester Mall, and I can go on and on, are businesses who would pay no taxes to the school districts if we just eliminated property taxes. So there has to be a balance. You don't want Peach Bottom Nuclear Power Plant in my district not paying taxes to the school district. You're talking $1 million there in just one particular commercial property or industrial property. So we need to tackle that. The House, Democrats and Republicans passed a constitutional amendment to eliminate property taxes and to make sure that on homesteads.
Right.
And the other thing is you got to understand, if you're in the southeastern part of the state, first of all, Philadelphia's already have their property tax reform in the city with an income tax on residents who live outside and work inside. So the Philadelphia legislators aren't interested in giving us a vote there. The southeast areas around the city of Philadelphia are right next to the state of Delaware, which has no sales tax, no real income taxes. So they're not interested with already the Philadelphia PIT on their residents outside the city, are not that gung-ho about putting up a tax vote that it puts them in a no-win situation.
For a variety of reasons right now, it's already
sorry to interrupt, but as we've talked about this many times in our town hall meetings, there are a lot of rural districts, especially in the northwestern and western part of the state. Property taxes is not a major concern.
When you're paying $500 to $1,000 in Potter County or Tioga County or wherever, it's not the same as when you're in York or Lancaster or Central Pennsylvania, where you're paying $5,000, $10,000 in property taxes.
Quick conversation about pensions. Big problem for Harrisburg. Need to address this in short order. Moody's recently downgraded the state's credit rating because of this outstanding obligation. We have some more than $40 billion to pay these systems. So, and the benefits promised to workers. What can you do about that? Are you going to see some action on this before Election Day?
I think some action has already been taken. I think we passed a strong bill 2 years ago, and I think even some of the reforms that are percolating this year has started to move us in the right direction. That's A. B, a lot of this is hinging on the stock market continuing to do well. I mean, so we're in a better position right now than we were, say, 2 to 3 years ago. But there's no question the lingering debt and what is owed and not having enough money in the system to pay that right now is a major challenge, and it's going to take bipartisan cooperation to fix it.
A quick thought. We have about less than a minute.
I have talked with the Democratic leaders of the House, the Senate, and as well as Republican leaders and the governor. I think both parties, and I think the governor are committed in the spring to tackle this problem and solve it before we pass the next budget, June of next year. So I think it will get done. Exactly what form it'll take at this point, not sure, but I do believe that we're probably headed to more of a 401k type plan for state employees, teachers, and legislators.
Representative Saylor, the Republican, Representative DePasquale, the Democrat, both of the fine county of York, as I am as well. Thanks so much for being here, gentlemen. When we come back, we're continuing our conversation, switching gears. Can I see some ID, please? Secretary of the Commonwealth Carol Aichle is here to walk through the very latest on the state's embattled voter ID law. Stay with us.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to the program. You know, there's a push across the country, many times by Republican-controlled legislatures and governors' offices, to pass voter ID laws in the name of improving the integrity of elections. However, the movements have received a lot of criticism from Democrats and civil rights groups who argue that these efforts are politically motivated. Here to help us wade through the situation with Pennsylvania's new voter ID law, Secretary of the Commonwealth Carol Aichle. Carol, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let's start with the very latest. The law stands in Pennsylvania following the Commonwealth Court ruling, but we have a Supreme Court decision coming down very soon. Can you talk about exactly what's going on with the law?
The law has been appealed. The judgment of the Commonwealth Court has been appealed to the Supreme Court, and they'll be hearing it next Thursday in Philadelphia, and it'll be televised. So people who are interested in the issues involving voter ID can watch that on television.
And what kind of decision could we see come out of that? There's a potential the justices could decide to stop the law from being enforced in November, or they could say it goes through.
They're Supreme Court justices. They can say whatever they want.
That's true. Nobody's going to question the judicial branch, but we'll have to see what happens. And the state obviously prepared to respond in either case, I imagine.
Correct. Correct.
But because the law stands now, a lot of your time now probably being spent spreading the word about this law. Can you talk about this big advertising campaign that's kicking off? What are you doing to get people on the same page?
We are doing a full-blown publicity campaign. We're using $5 million to get the word out to all groups in Pennsylvania. We'll be running TV ads. They started last week. We're doing radio ads. We're doing robocalls. I know people sometimes are not happy with robocalls, but we're leaving no stone unturned. Every household with a registered voter in Pennsylvania will be getting a mailing to remind them that they need to have photo ID. And we're visiting community groups through an outreach program and have visited more than 200 groups so far.
And also, the state, the Commonwealth, doing everything it can to get people an acceptable ID, including this newly created Department of State ID that's only good for voting. These are now available at driver's license centers across the state.
They are, and we're getting a very favorable response from citizens who need this kind of a identification. It's primarily for people who don't have Pennsylvania birth certificates. It's people who were born in Puerto Rico or born in South Carolina. I had one person who told me he was born in Aruba but was a U.S. citizen. His birth certificate is written in Dutch. So those kinds of variables, issues. And the Department of State ID doesn't require a birth certificate. You need to go in and give your last name, first name, date of birth, and your Social Security number. You don't need to have the little paper card, and then proof of residency. So it's a standard that we think supports the integrity of the voting process, yet is a little bit easier.
Yeah, and one of the things we should make really clear is that if you're going to get one of these IDs, either that or a PennDOT photo identification card, nobody should be having to pay if this is the ID that they need to obtain to vote, correct?
Thank you for asking that. It has been reported in newspaper outlets and sometimes in the press that there is a charge. There is no charge.
Because that would be a poll tax of sorts, and critics would at least call it a poll tax, right?
And I'm sure the courts would have looked at it that way. There is no charge. These identification cards are free.
Mm-hmm. Now, but the onus is somewhat on the citizen who's going to make it very clear that this is for voting, correct?
And I think the PennDOT people have been well-versed in asking people for what reason they're seeking an ID card, and I'm very confident that the PennDOT employees will be reaching out to people coming in for voter IDs.
Yes, Secretary, we have to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Secretary Carol Aichle, Secretary of the Commonwealth, about Pennsylvania's voter ID law. I hope you stay with us.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
We're talking with Secretary of the Commonwealth Carol Aichle about Pennsylvania's voter ID law. Secretary, one of the other things that comes up during this conversation is why do this? And the state did stipulate in the Commonwealth Court proceedings that they didn't have any evidence of in-person voter fraud. Can you speak? I mean, obviously, Governor Tom Corbett supports this effort. Speak on behalf of the administration. Why was this necessary to do?
The definition of fraud, it's very hard to detect. So it would not be something that any citizen going in or out to vote would be able to notice, and it's very hard to prosecute fraud because fraud is meant to deceive. One of the issues that I think moved this initiative forward more quickly was the ACORN efforts during the last few years to register voters, because registration is the first step to voting. And with fraudulent registrations and then people coming in to vote and representing they are one of the fraudulent registrations, that would be very hard for a poll worker to identify.
But if you can't detect it necessarily or identify, but you do believe while there's no evidence, you know that the fraud is there? I mean, that's hard to reconcile for some people.
I think it is hard to reconcile, but I think if you look at 250 years of American history, there's always been fraud in the voting process, and some of it is pretty well documented. So I think this is one step towards helping people to have confidence in the voting process. I certainly watched what happened in 2000 in Florida, and it's something that we should never let happen again. And this is one way we can move towards assuring voters that it's one person, one vote, one time.
Especially for people with, say, mobility trouble or so forth. This law does create a burden. You acknowledge that if it's difficult for them to get out, it may be difficult for them to get to the driver's license center to maybe get one of these IDs.
Correct. And they can use absentee ballots. This is a process for people who, and we have many voters in Pennsylvania who have difficulty moving around, and they certainly, we welcome them. They're using absentee ballots.
And you only have to you have to write down a driver's license number, last 4 digits of your social, or provide a photocopy of an ID to file an absentee ballot.
That's correct.
But it's not, but let's clear something up on this program. It's that these absentee ballots have sometimes been billed in the press as a pressure valve. Well, if you don't have an acceptable ID, all you have to do is know your last 4 digits and you can vote absentee. But the law is clear in Pennsylvania. Not just anyone can ask for an absentee ballot, right?
That's correct. People who would have difficulty getting to the polls and can document that. People who are out of state on election day, but you can't just, it's not an optional form of voting in Pennsylvania.
That's
you
right.
have to have an excuse.
No, very good. And also, let's finish out the conversation here, kind of wrapping up the thoughts about this being politically charged. Democrats, that's where their argument hinges, that this is about suppressing the Democratic vote in a critical presidential election year. Can you talk about why it was this year where the push is on? Some say it feels rushed to get it in before this November.
I think our intent is to make sure that when the votes are counted on Wednesday morning after the election here in Pennsylvania, people look at the election results and are certain that the person who has the most votes won the election, and that there is no dispute like we had in Florida after the Bush-Gore race. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one way we can do this now. We didn't have the technology years ago. Quite frankly, IDs wouldn't have been appropriate 10 or 12 years ago because it wasn't so much a part of American life. This is in 2012. We can do this, and we can ensure that every Pennsylvania registered voter can vote. If you go into a polling place and there is some anomaly in your ID, please ask for a provisional ballot. It is your right as a citizen to get a provisional ballot and just ask to vote that way. No one in Pennsylvania will be denied the right to vote.
Secretary, we're going to leave that as the last word. And of course, we're talking about this voter ID law, and we'll have to wait and see what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decides. But that is our time for Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week. As always, thanks for watching and stay well. Terry will be back next week.